Doug, can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Yeah, great. So we're live now on various, means. Certainly on Patriot.tv. I'm running a live on X space right now, as well as some other things, just to have a conversation with you. Trump just finished. I watched the entirety of his comments, and clearly very, very frustrated. I'm very frustrated with it. The American people, I think, we're sick to our stomachs about what's going on in the country. One of the things that I'll just tee up a couple of points here that I wrote down about what I saw, what I heard. One of the things that Trump said was that this is bigger than him. This is much bigger than Trump. And I think that reflects his clear understanding that this is not just about, going after Donald J. Trump's, him personally, his family, or his businesses anymore. This is much, much bigger. And now we're looking at the extension, and I can say this, the extension of everything from going back to Russiagate, the impeachments, every single thing that we have seen the left do in this country to essentially destroy the country in order to change the direction of the United States of America. I firmly believe that. And so I think the fact that Trump made that comment that this is bigger than him is very, very important statement. I mean, he talked about all the different aspects of what the trial was about, and some of the internal back and forth inside the courthouse. The one thing that I don't know, he mentioned the J6. I got to bring this up. He mentioned the J6 subcommittee that was set up by Pelosi and how they destroyed all this evidence. And he mentioned it kind of in passing almost, because it didn't look like he went really off of any. He didn't have a teleprompter. He looked like he had a little half sheet of notes. But when he mentioned that, I thought he was going to raise the idea that Congress, which we worked very hard for, to at least hold the House of Representatives, was going to do more or to take more action. He did not. I'm a little bit disappointed in that part of his comments. I do believe that the standing up of the weaponization subcommittee and the fact that many of us worked very hard to get at least the House of Representatives in the 2022 election taken back by the conservatives, by the Republicans, and yet we haven't seen anything done there. So let me just toss it to you and give you some time to just kind of go through where you think we are in this very unprecedented, historic moment. These are uncharted waters. People can talk, all these lawyers can talk about all the legal aspects of whatever the law is supposed to say. People can talk about polls. The polls said generally the same things prior to the 2020 election, and we saw the outcome of that. So I'm very reticent to believe in any kind of polls at all. And I do believe that what we now need to really focus on is the future, because this judge, when Trump goes back in, and this judge may even be contemplating some of the statements that Trump just said to bring him back into court. I don't know. We'll see what happens throughout the remainder of this day. But when this judge brings him back in on the right now, the sentence is on 11 July. I firmly believe that this judge is going to put him in jail on that day. So let me pause there and throw it over to you, Doug. And I do appreciate having this dialogue with you.
Well, thank you. And thank you for asking me to join you. I appreciate it. First of all, there is some good news in the middle of all this disappointing nonsense. And I really think it's nonsense. I think the trials from the very beginning has been a travesty.
Yep.
And the good news is that the American people are the ultimate jury. And they're going to have an opportunity to speak on 5 November. But of course, that opportunity is going to depend heavily on the enforcement of our laws. And that means ensuring that only American citizens vote, and that they only vote once. Now, I can't guarantee that, neither can you, but we know, for instance, in Florida, where you and I are both located at the moment, that the Florida Constitution says if you're not a United States citizen, you can't vote. So we hope that Florida and a number of other states that have that in their constitutions will rigorously enforce it. But I think that's what we have to keep in mind. Whatever happened today is probably going to be irrelevant on the 6th of November, provided we have a free and fair election. I think the second part is this travesty of justice really reinforces the perceptions of millions and millions and millions of Americans that the system is rigged against them. We're dealing with a government that has weaponized the institutions of power against us. And that's a message that I think was partially sent by President Trump. But if they missed it, we need to understand that our Department of Justice, the military, the intelligence services, all of these places are now compromised, and they are arrayed against us. And I think the last thing, and this is by no means the last comment, but something worth considering, are the open borders. This is not the time and the place to discuss the threats to the United States, but there is a huge existential threat to us and to our republic. And that has been deliberately created by this administration. They have forced open the borders. They are working closely with the non-governmental organizations from the Darien Gap all the way up to the border with Texas and New Mexico and Arizona and California to bring in as many people as possible. They are instructing these people what they should do when they arrive to get the 4 phony Social Security numbers that they can present in lieu of any true documentation of citizenship and claim that they think they're citizens and should vote. They're being instructed to vote specifically for President Biden or whomever ends up on the Democratic ticket. Yep. That's something that President Trump mentioned, but it needs to be understood. This is not accidental. This is deliberate, and this is sinister. And those of us who love this country, those of us who consider ourselves to be Americans first, should be very concerned about what's happened there. And then we can talk perhaps a little bit, Mike, if you want to, about the looming dangers in Ukraine and the Middle East.
Yeah, I absolutely do on both of those, because those are two very, very strategic issues that could complicate and are complicating everything going on domestically here in the United States of America. You know, Trump mentioned about the number of Chinese, and he said in just the last month or so, my numbers right now is I have over 100,000 Chinese military age men that have entered this country in the last 3 years. And, and there's really no telling, no hide, no hair of where they're physically at. Let's talk. I want to talk about 5 November. And I always say this to people, and I'll be very, very, wide open here, because I've said this in different forums and on different shows about whether or not, I can see a scenario where there is no election, because we're dealing with a takeover of the United States of America by a very hardcore progressive left, otherwise known as Marxist or communist. And they have weaponized the federal government in many capacities, in many ways, the intelligence community, clearly inside the White House, clearly inside of the Department of State, other aspects of the government. There are other agencies and activities inside the U.S. government that are run by communists. So that's number one. The second thing is if I was on their team, if I was an advisor on the left, I would be advising the left to figure out any which way that they could to not hold an election. Now, putting that sort of bombshell out there, but unexploded right now because we don't know, but putting that unexploded bombshell out there that says, we may not even have an election on the 5th. I can see that. I can see that scenario. I can clearly see that scenario. And so if that is the case, if that happens, then what? And it's like what happened yesterday. Yesterday was one of those moments in U.S. history that it never happened before. We've never been through there before, right? So we've never, not had a presidential election in the manner that we always have expected, sort of, conventionally thinking. thinking normally, the normal process that we have in our country, this normal political process. So if I was on their team, I would be thinking that way. And that's, that's me, because that's how I think. Now, so let's take it to the best case. The best case is we have a election. We run from whatever it is, 160 days till the 5th of November, where we have an election. The people that are listening to us now, they have got to get smart about the election laws and the people that are running their elections. I mean, at the local level, at the county level, and clearly at the state level. People still gripe to me about mail-in ballots and ballot harvesting and illegals. These people are going to do everything they can to basically run the gauntlet here with whatever they can do. Basically registering illegals, giving them ID cards, making sure that they have ways to vote. They're going to do these in these states that are already hardcore blue states. And many of these hardcore blue states are, to me, a lot of people think, and I'll throw out a couple. Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is a state that is not right now in Trump's camp. Now, the people of Pennsylvania that listen to me right now will go, "Oh, that's bullshit. We are all for Trump." Well, you don't have a governor who's for Trump, and you don't have a state legislature who's for Trump. They may wear a red shirt, but they're not America First type people. They are not. Wisconsin is another really critical state. I mean, there's a recall going on for the longest serving Speaker of the House in the Wisconsin state legislature, Robin Vos, who is such an anti-Trumper. These people are guaranteed. Last night after the verdict came in, these people were chomping at the bit to throw Trump further under the bus. These are Republicans. These are members of the GOP. So I'm not talking about the progressive left or the Democrats or whatever is left of that. I do believe, and I'll stop here with this and throw it back to you, Doug. I do believe that there are people like me, okay, and many, many millions in this country that are looking at this and saying, man, if they're going to go after a guy like Trump like this, do I stand a chance? Because I'm telling you, one of the things that Trump mentioned, he mentioned that one of his old business partners that went to jail, they threatened him 15 years unless you have something on Trump. They threatened me 25 years unless you have something on Trump. Otherwise, you're going to have to take a plea deal, which I did. So they threatened me with 25 years targeting my son, and if you had something on Trump, we can help you out. There was nothing on Trump because there's nothing there. There is nothing there. And so what they ended up with was 34 counts of ledger documentation. These are misdemeanors, if anything. These are non-crimes. This judge is looking at this judge is going to put him in jail, and then we're in another place. Like he says, like Trump says, the most important day is the 5th of November. I pray that we get to that day. I pray that we have a vote on that day. But let me pause there, and after that analysis, if you will, and throw it back to you, because I do want to jump to talk about these wars that we're involved in, because these wars are going to end up pulling the American people away from what is really important, which is the theft of the United States of America. So let me stop there. Throw it to you.
Well, Mike, you made a number of important points. At OCOC, Our Country, Our Choice, we make the point repeatedly that this is not about Republicans and Democrats. You've made that very clear. There are people on both sides of this so-called bipartisan system who are equally bad, who sign up for bad policies and bad ideas. There are millions of solid American patriots who call themselves Democrats. There are millions of solid American patriots who call themselves Republicans. We try very hard to appeal to both of them, saying, look, we are up against the uniparty. And that's what you're describing, the uniparty. Exactly. This is a cabal in Washington that is determined not only to enrich itself, but to stay in power forever. They've gained power. They have no intention under any circumstances of giving it up. Now we have to do something and we have to uphold the law. The biggest mistake we can make at this point would be to run out of the house, our hair on fire, pitchforks in hand, and begin attacking anybody in sight that we don't like, specifically law enforcement. Absolutely not. We stand up for the law. We must insist that law enforcement enforce the law. And that's something that we've got to do. We've got to tell these people in the FBI, in the police, in the military, whomever we're talking to on the streets at any point in time, you are America's first line of defense. What are you doing? Are you defending us, or are you defending the cabal in Washington that's stuffing its pockets full of cash and essentially leading us down the road to destruction? That's the first thing. The other thing is that elections are easily disrupted, and you're right to worry about whether or not we're actually going to have it on 5 November. But the surest sign that the left, or I should say the uniparty in Washington, is convinced that it will lose will be demonstrated the moment they suggest that perhaps we should postpone the elections. Exactly. If that comes up, whoever says that is telling you and me and everyone else what happened to Trump is now happening to you. And oh, by the way, we're not going to allow you to win, because if we do, you will throw us out. And that has to be understood by everybody. And I'm glad that President Trump talked about the border, because that's inextricably intertwined with this whole idea of upholding the law. That's the first place the law is broken down, and it is spread across the United States. We have district attorneys who've managed to hold office who would never have had office if it were not for the enormous sums of money that have been donated by our friend Soros and many others like him. They would not be releasing criminals onto the streets. So the notion that somehow or another, as you point out, these misdemeanors justify jail time, when in fact we are releasing, I say we because I'm talking about the American government at every level, county, city, town, state, and federal, they are releasing criminals on a daily basis into our country. People who have committed rape, people who have committed theft, people who have committed murder. And here we are focused on this man who has dared to challenge the status quo. And by the way, he hasn't been placed on trial yet, but if you look at RFK Jr., who can't get any Secret Service protection, who is being excluded from the debate process, there's another example of voter suppression. So we're talking about institutionalized voter suppression against Trump as well as against RFK Jr. This has got to stop. The way we stop it, though, is that we uphold the law, and we insist that law enforcement, that our sheriffs, police chiefs, everyone, especially on the day where everyone votes, uphold the law.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, 100%. You know, we're the people ask me all the time, what can I do? I don't know what to do. You know, we are a representative republic, meaning that, you know, we vote for the people that are going to represent us essentially in, you know, at every level of government. And I do think that if people feel that they don't know what to do, probably the very first thing that I would do as a citizen is start to challenge the people that we did put into office, to tell them, look, just as you just said, hey, look, we have got to uphold the law. We've got to stop allowing this kind of nonsensical, you know, these things that are happening. I mean, I drove down, because you mentioned that we're in Florida. I drove down. I returned from a trip here the last couple of weeks, and I was coming down the highway of I-75. There were 3 Border Patrol checkpoints in Florida on I-75. Border Patrol checkpoints in a state where I know they've been flying in illegals. So when I think about what can people do, people need to challenge their representatives. They need to go to these meetings that we typically have. Challenge, like moms have been challenging school boards for their children. We need to challenge our representatives wherever they're coming back to, if those that come from Washington, D.C., back home to do meetings with their constituents, you know, sheriffs who are holding meetings, or the people can demand meetings to be held with their elected representatives. I mean, this is the discourse that the American people are going to have to start to get into. in order for us to participate as a, in a citizens republic where we, the people, are supposed to be, really running the country, we do it through our representatives who we vote into office. That's how we're supposed to do it. But at the same time, there is another check and balance that we do have. And that's when these people do come back home to get our vote again, or those that are in our local areas to challenge them at the various meetings that we do have. So there are ways for people to get involved.
Yeah, Mike, if I could just interrupt for a second and point out something. The Uniparty has billions of dollars behind it. And that's one of the reasons that President Trump and many other good Americans have been subjected to what we call lawfare. We don't have enough money on an individual basis to defend ourselves against the state, let alone the Uniparty. We estimate that about 30% of the billionaires are pouring money into the Uniparty, and that is being used against us. Where are our billionaires? Where are those Americans with money who can put together a fund to defend Americans who are being subjected to lawfare? I want to know where they are. They need to stand up. They don't need me to do this or you or anyone else. They can put together these funds, and they can make it clear that if people are unjustly accused and face, as President Trump does, unjust incarceration, they are prepared to stand with them and help them. Because if they don't provide that kind of backup, it's very hard for the individual citizen, regardless of how patriotic they are and how strongly they believe, to stand up to the powers that are currently arrayed against them. So I think that needs to be understood. I hope they're listening to us, Mike, because if they're not, they need to start listening soon, or their country will be taken from them.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I don't know how many groups I have sat in front of to plead to them. I mean, these big donors, we call them, right? To plead to them and tell them, look, we are rapidly losing our country. We have a group of people that are ready to go out there and fight at different levels, politically, and to do it the right way. But we need to have money for hot coffee and glazed donuts, right? And they're still, they have been reticent now. And it's interesting that you raise this, because we'll probably end up with a lot of grassroots people listening to us, and they're all kind of, I guarantee most of them are going to be saying the same thing, like, oh my God, these guys are so right. In the last probably 3 months, I have had more people that I spoke to after the 2020 election when I said, look, this election didn't, there's a lot of irregularities and there's a lot of fraud in this last 2020 election. There's a group of us that are going to fight it. And then when we got into the 2022, the pre-2022 elections, we're going to go out into like 7 or 8 or 9 states is what we went into. And we're going to go out there. We're going to fight at the grassroots level to canvass, to raise awareness, to register, and to get people out to vote. And you go to these people then, and you're like, you're not asking for that much money. And frankly, you're not asking them to do any work other than just stroke a check for us. We'll go do the work, right? But it's like, I don't know.
If I could just say very briefly here, and I mean this sincerely, you don't have to send me any money. I'm not asking for money. I'm simply saying to the people out there that have it, that if they want to retain control of the country, in other words, they want to keep America a free place to live, they've got to put together a fund to support people who are unjustly accused and then will face unjust incarceration. Because we know the law can be interpreted in any number of different ways to the advantage of the people that confront us. Now, in this connection, we need to understand that there's a lot of talk about, the dangers overseas. These are always exaggerated. And I continue to tell people that government loves to create serious enemies overseas because it enables them to suppress free speech. It enables them to restrict our freedom. It compels us to march in a direction that we might not otherwise march. We are not being told the truth about many things. We'll hear about the Chinese threat, the Russian threat, the Islamist threat, any number of threats. How often do we hear about what's happening at the border? We don't. The mainstream media brushes it aside. The government doesn't even want to talk about it. That's the problem. We need to understand the existential threat to us is not somewhere else. There are no new wars that we need to fight. The war that we must fight and win is right now inside our country and on our border. And that's why these billionaires that are out there that have the funds need to get involved. We don't need to know their names. They don't need to put themselves at risk. There are plenty of us who will, but we need their monetary support to protect us when we challenge this corrupt regime that currently governs us.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree, and I do believe that, I hope that it's not too late. I do know that there are a number of them that have reached out to me in the last 90 days that have said, what can we do? What can I can't believe that our country is at this level, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm glad that you're finally here, but I wish you were here like 3 years ago when we saw the first 4 years of the Trump administration being abused and attacked by this weaponized, these weaponized institutions that we have. And I know that you're not out there, asking for anything. You're out there working your tail off. But I would say that,
Mike, if I could just interrupt you, the people that are out there carrying the fight, these are truckers. How many times have we seen truckers demonstrate in Canada, in the United States, and Europe? The average trucker doesn't have a legal defense fund. He can be run into bankruptcy overnight by the law that are directed against him. And he's the tip of the iceberg. What about the people in other rural areas? What about the people in urban areas that are worried about their own rights, that are worried that they're going to be attacked, they're going to be brutalized, and the police are underfunded? They may not show up, not because they don't want to, but because there simply aren't enough of them. And then the average policeman figures, well, if I intervene and I stop this, I'm going to be prosecuted by the district attorney and the criminal is going to go free.
Yep.
How can you maintain order if you cannot enforce the law? We've got to be part of all of this. And we need the support for all of the people that I just mentioned. We need to think long and hard about our armed forces. We've got a lot of people overseas right now. There's a lot happening. The real question we have to ask is, how much of this do we want to support when our own country is falling apart, when our borders are open and the law is not being enforced?
Yeah. Well, you know this. We can't afford to be in this war in Eastern Europe right now. We cannot afford to continue to do what we're doing in the Middle East. We just can't. We can't afford it. Our military is not strong enough. Our debt is extraordinary. The level of readiness, the level of preparedness. I mean, all the things that you have been talking about for years and years, and you have served your life in this world. But what those things allow this current administration to do is to distract us from the severity of the problems that we have right here that they have created intentionally. So I want people to understand, at least from my perspective, this is not due to incompetence. There might be some incompetent people in government. There always are. But this state of play here in the United States of America right now is anything but unintentional. This is by intention, by design, and exactly what they have been striving to achieve here at home domestically. The big thing that really concerns me are the type of people that do come into this country, that have come into this country, that we know have come into this country. Our own government has said that they've warned us that we've had this rise of terrorists coming into this country. There is a certain point in time where you begin, even the intentionality of allowing this border incursion, and now these people are all over the country. That intentional design, there comes a point when it is no longer in your control, and it gets out of control because you think you might be able to control this, but you don't. And that's our problem. So if we're distracted with all this stuff overseas, never mind what the Chinese are doing, both here in this country, but also what they're doing over in the Pacific. I mean, there's all these things that are coming to a head. Go ahead.
You and I know that these people that are here illegally can be rounded up and expelled. Exactly. We have needed that for a very long time. They need to go home. The vast majority, I think, if you tell them, look, you need to get out of the country, you've got 60 or 90 days to leave. if you leave voluntarily and you give us your name and we capture information about you and you want to come back in the future when we're able to accept more people, then we will allow you back. But you need to leave. And if you refuse to leave and you are arrested, you will face harsh penalties under the law. Long before you are ever expelled, you will sit in prison. That needs to be understood. Now, there's something else here. During the World Wars, Sir Winston Churchill was approached on more than one occasion. And military commanders came to him and said, what if we lose Egypt? You know, we could lose Egypt. And his comment to them was, well, Egypt's all fine, well, and good. If we lose Egypt, we can fight and get it back. But if we lose Great Britain, the home islands, we're finished. Yep. That's the attitude that we need to have now. What counts most in our history, in the history of this country, is our nation. It must be held together. We must hold it together. That's number one. We can deal with things overseas subsequently. And I don't think most Americans are hearing that. And that's the message they've got to hear.
Yeah. And I think that's probably the number one point for me that'll come out of what I am learning and what I'm seeing is that the American people need to understand that this is about, the United States of America. This is about our country. And as you have created, this idea of which choices do we want Americans to make? I want Americans to make the number one choices for our country first. And to me, we always talk about God and family and country. I mean, we are at risk. I want anybody that's listening or anybody that'll hear this in the future. This nation is at risk right now. We are at grave, grave risk to losing this country if we continue down this path. And I was glad to hear Trump say today that this is bigger than him. He realizes that. He is willing to stand his ground, as he is being placed in this very incredibly difficult, an unfathomable position. And because he got in the way, of this, whatever we want to call it, this uniparty, this globalist, this takeover, right? It's a takeover of the country as far as I'm concerned. So he got in the way.
And
go
Mike,
ahead.
I would just make one final comment, and then I've got to go, and I think probably everybody's sick and tired of listening to us. But I've got to go. What I would tell everybody is something they really need to keep in mind. No human being in the history of this country that I can think of has been subjected to the kind of destructive treatment that Donald Trump has endured. And this is not a secret overseas. There are people in Europe today watching what is happening here.
Exactly.
And they are viewing this as a miscarriage of justice. Most of them are suspending disbelief because they're saying, you're telling me that a former president of the United States is on trial for, as you rightly point out, at best misdemeanors, and you're going to put him in jail? It's absurd. And the same thing was true when Bill Clinton was approached over his Lewinsky affair and other things. And people in Europe said, what are you doing? This makes no sense. Washington has become a clown show. It needs to end, but it will not end as long as we tolerate it. We've got to end it. We've got to work from now until 5 November to end this clown show. Make it clear what comes first. And remember that President Trump's most grievous sin when he came to Washington was to disrupt the money flow. Anyone who stands up and says, I'm going to change something, whether it is Donald Trump or RFK Jr., is immediately a threat, because what they want in Washington is no change. They want to sedate us. They want to keep us down with bread and circuses. They want to suppress us. We can't allow that to happen. That's my final word. Thanks very much for inviting me.
Hey, real quick, how do people get a hold of you?
I'm not going to tell you. No, I'm just kidding.
I do want to thank you for everything that you're doing, and I want to just recognize our country, our choice, and so I want people to know what that is about. What is that about, real briefly?
Well, I would go to ourcountryourchoice.com and go to the website, and you will learn everything that you really want to know. But we're policy oriented in the sense that we're about big issues. We're not about personalities. We're not attacking people in the political arena by by name. We don't want to do that. We're not telling anybody how they should vote. What we're trying to do is tell them, look, we want an end to the open borders. We want the rule of law at home. We want an end to the open-ended commitments of our military power to small nations all over the world that are anxious to leverage us. These are tails that want to wag the dog. We need to get out of that business. And then we need to think carefully about who is coming into the country. We do need to reinforce the requirement to expel the people that are not here legally. But we've got to stop the sexualization of our children. We've got to stop the human trafficking. And unless we do all of these things, we're going to continue to lose 110 to 120,000 Americans every year to fentanyl poisoning. And that's something the media won't tell you. They'll tell you about the 1 or 2 Americans who were injured or killed in some remote part of the world. I'm sorry about that. But what's happening here, as you point out, is more important. And we've got to guard against all of those who want to separate us and divide us on racial lines or economic lines. I grew up in North Philadelphia. I grew up with large numbers of people who in those days were simply called Black Americans. I've got news for you. They want the rule of law. They want to be safe in their neighborhoods. Everybody does. It's not a partisan issue. And that's where we need to focus and get out of this business of cultivating hatred, because that's another feature of this globalist regime. They love to cultivate hatred to divide us. We've got to stand up against that.
Yeah. Doug, thanks very much. Thanks for your service and just thanks for your partnership with everything. I really appreciate your always very honest, very frank, and very expert level of analysis and judgment. So God bless you. And for everybody that's been watching here today, we just wanted to provide you a little bit of insight. And here we are. Here we are. I think everybody's just got to keep paying attention. Find the right sources of information. We're broadcasting to you from patriot.tv today. It's a relatively new network, and we're going to continue to grow, continue to bring people together, and continue to provide the truth. We have to stop this weaponization of our government on every level against the American people. Has to end. We cannot have this anymore. We can't be a country. I mean, hell, we've talked about, no borders, no country, all kinds of stuff here today, but we can't have this weaponization directed against every single American that doesn't see the world the way the Uniparty sees it. So anyway, God help us. Doug, thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you. God bless.